Right. So a lot of this back half of chapter 11 is about data and then like finding the mean, median, mode and making it into normal distributions. And so kind of just like analyzing and making sense of data. This part we're going to talk about in 11.7 is about like how do you gather the data? Okay. And so, we want to have good data. Otherwise, all that stuff we do, like mean, median, mode, won't be really accurate if our data is not good. So the way you gather data, there's like different methods for doing it, and then there's bias, basically meaning if we do it wrong, it could favor one type of answer over the other. All right, so kind of this is a big piece of this. We want to like figure out how do we gather data um, in a way that's not biased. Okay, so um, I'll start with sort of an example. I have actually always wondered this, like who, according to the students here, right? Who is the funniest teacher? I get a lot of Fossum, I guess, when I ask this. Oakland's always up there too. There's never any Mr. Westphals, by the way, when I ask this. Just kidding. I know I'm not the funniest. So, anyways, a couple of vocab things to start off with. You have population and sample. Okay. And so population is just everybody that we're interested in. So it would be all the RHS students, which I'll just say, like, I think we have about 1,500 students. That's our population. Okay. And so the issue is I don't have time to go to every single student, right? That even if I took a minute with each student, that'd be 1,500 minutes. That'd take me a long time. So what we do is instead of surveying all of them, we do a sample, right? So a sample is just part of the total population. Okay. And so in our particular example, um, we might survey, say, like 100 students. Okay. And so what 100 RHS students, I guess. So one of the things is how do we pick these students, right? Because I don't want to do like just my classes. And if I did just my own classes, that'd be okay. But I have mostly juniors, right? So then I wouldn't get a good sense of like what freshmen and sophomores and seniors think. Okay, so you want to do it in a way that equally represents all the different people in the school. Okay, um, so where the heck is this? All right, so there are um, four different ways you can do sampling. All right, there's something called convenience. So a convenience sample would just be like if I was actually now I'm a little bit all over the place here, but would be like, let's say I wanted to poll about like who you going to vote for, right? So who are you going to vote for? Okay, so one way I could figure that out, like let's say I was interested in, I don't know, like just I guess everybody in the country, right? So that my population would be all voters, okay, and then let's say my sample would be I survey 100 voters. Or 1,000. Maybe I'll get a little more. The more you get, the better generally. Okay. So anyways, that's kind of just reviewing population sample. So one of the ways I could get my 1,000 people is I could just go outside of a target and just keep asking them who are you going to vote for. Okay. And so the reason that this is problematic, which is called bias. Okay. And so the bias here is it favors people who shop at Target. Okay, and there are certain segments of the population that probably actually don't shop at Target, right? There's probably a lot of people that are really Walmart people, really love Walmart, and so they would not be included in our survey, which would not be great, right? Self-selected would be like if I mailed out a letter and said, "Hey, who are you going to vote for?" All right, that's pretty simple, but again, it's going to be biased, and I think this one's actually really biased because only people that care respond. Okay, and if you ask me, in the last two elections, Trump in the polls has done not so great, right? When they asked who you're going to vote for, but then the actual election, he won one of them and did pretty good in the other one, right? Way higher than the poll said. And I think the big reason for that is is it's somewhat self-selected, right? They were calling people or trying to like get them to respond to things, and only the people that really cared responded. And I think there's a decent percentage of Trump voters who didn't really want to respond, and so they didn't end up being part of the sample, right? So the sample was not really representative of the population because only the people that cared actually respond. All right. Systematic is pretty good, right? If you call every 10th person in the phone book, and that's pretty good. It's close to like, so systematic just means, sorry, I don't know if I explained this clearly, but self-selected is the people decide to respond or not. Systematic is just like a system or a process. Um, so calling every 10th person in the phone book, if I stopped every 5th student in the hallway, if I took a roster of all the students in the school and picked every 10th student, that would be systematic. Okay, and this is pretty good, but it actually in the last few elections this was a problem too, and the bias is it does not include cell phone users. Okay, so lots of cell phone users aren't in the phone book, and so an example of this is Bernie Sanders for a long time polled not so great, but then did actual better in the primary elections, and the reason was he had a lot of young voters who did not have regular phones and therefore were not in the phone book, right? They had only cell phones, and so they were not in the phone book. So it turned out that he would actually, again, poll not so great, but in the actual elections, he did okay. Um, so that one can have bias because it does not include cell phone users. And then the best is if you can do it just a random sampling. So if you had all the people in Rogers, all the people in all list of all voters and have a computer select them. Okay, so that's literally the best way you can do it because everybody has a chance to be selected, and then assuming we can get them to actually respond, then that's going to be the best. Okay, so a random sample is unbiased. Okay, so those are the 4 different types. Now in the test, you'll have to identify which type of sampling method is being used. Okay, so let's go back and just talk about like the different samples here. So you could pause the video and see if you could figure out what sampling would be for each type. So I'll put the 4 types up and see how it would look here in our about who's the funniest teacher. Okay, and actually I'm going to change my mind. Let's try this first. See if you can just identify the sampling method here and then would there have any bias. So there's the 4 choices. Hopefully you have them down, but then try it here. Okay, article on taxing readers to call the paper and express their opinion. So that's self-selected because they are choosing to call in. Okay, and that is very biased usually because again, you're only getting people that care and care about that specific issue. Okay, interviewing people leaving the largest park, that would be convenience because it's easy, you're just sitting outside the park, right? It's convenient, it's simple. Anytime you're like at a spot and just polling people, that's convenience, but it's going to be biased because you are only sampling park goers. So if our question is about parks, then we probably shouldn't be sitting outside a park because that's going to favor park goers, favor the park probably in general. Every 50th listing in the local phone book, that's systematic. Okay, and you could say this is biased, again, biased because there are no cell phone users in this sample. Okay, so they're not included in the sample, which can create issues like we talked about with Bernie Sanders. All right, so maybe appeared to be a real good test to see if you got this. So in this situation, see if you can figure out what would a convenience, self-selected, and systematic or random sample look like in if our population was 1,500 students and I had to sample 100 of them. All right, so convenience, there'd be a lot of different ones. You could just survey the kids in your lunch or something, but for me, it would be just if I surveyed my own students. Surveying students in my classes, which is easy, but at the end it's biased because mostly juniors are being surveyed then. self-selected is I could put a poll on Schoology. And again, that's going to be problematic because only the kids that really care are going to participate, so it doesn't get everybody. Systematic could be poll every, I should write it this way, poll every 10th student in our school roster. And that's actually probably pretty good, to be honest. That would almost be unbiased as long as I can get them to respond and I take from all the different grade levels. I think that would be pretty good. Random would be put all the student names in a computer program or hat and have it select 100 to be surveyed. Okay, and that generally is going to be the best. If you can get a random sample, that's going to give you the least amount of bias in your data. All right, so sampling method is one way it can be biased, but another way that you can introduce bias is in the way you ask the questions. And so actually I find these quite fascinating. So like they've done for certain procedures, like elective procedures in a hospital, if they tell people there's a 90% survival rate, they're pretty likely to sign up for it or be more likely to sign up for it than if they say 10% death rate. And you can see where that affects people, right? 90% survival sounds pretty good, but 10% death does not sound too good. Same thing with hamburger. Like if you ever look at hamburger in the store, they might say it's like 80% lean or something, but that means 20% is fat. So if they change the label to 20% fat, I bet that would greatly affect the sales. All right. One that I've heard on the radio actually is I heard a president once they asked them, what are some mistakes in your administration? And I think that's a poor question because it's just implying that there's mistakes, right? If you're saying, well, there must have been mistakes, please list them, right? Or if I asked you, have you stopped cheating on tests, right? That there's no way to answer that. If you say yes, that means you used to cheat and are no longer cheating. And if you say no, that means you're still cheating. Okay, so like the way you ask your questions can introduce bias and makes a pretty big difference. Okay, so you'll have to identify bias in questions, and here's some like vocab that is kind of helpful. Honestly, you don't have to use like these exact different ones, but they'll maybe make more sense as we do some examples here. I just show them because it's not a bad starting point. Basically, you just have to say if it's favoring two options, like which one is it biased towards, right? And again, that'll become more apparent as we go. So one thing is if you have strong words like, would you vote for stupid Mr. Westphal? Well, that's not a great question because that's what's called a loaded question because you're saying that I'm stupid, and it makes them less likely to say yes. Leading question is say, don't you think Mr. Hood is the greatest St. John's football player ever? By saying don't you think, I'm trying to lead them to say yes, you do think Mr. Hood's the greatest St. John's football player ever. Combined two more issues are don't you think Mr. Westphal, well, that's a leading question. Let me do you think Mr. Westphal does a bad job explaining things and is bad at disciplining students? Right, so that's two separate issues in one question. So you want to have just one issue per question. Double negatives is don't you think it's not true that space aliens are not a thing, right? So you don't want to have a lot of nots in there. So anyways, I think I'll make another video and you have to identify the bias in the questions. So I'll stop for now and then we'll do one more video quick. Should be pretty short.